Beverly was 34 years old in the fall of 1990, and she had the kind of life that people in small Appalachian towns built slowly and carefully and loved fiercely. She had grown up in Harlan County, Kentucky, the second of 4 daughters in a family that made its living the way most families in Harlan County did, the mines. Her father had worked the same seam for 22 years. Her 2 brothers followed him in. Beverly was the one who did not. She had a gift for numbers that her high school math teacher, Mrs. Elaine Pruitt, described in a 1991 newspaper article as rare. Beverly had used that gift to land a job as a bookkeeper at Callaway Lumber and Hardware on Main Street, where she had worked for 11 years and knew every account by heart. She was also, by the late 1980s, a single mother. Her marriage to Gary Cordell had ended in 1986. It had not been a good marriage. It had not ended well. But Beverly had done what Beverly did. She had steadied herself, kept her job, kept her house on Maple Fork Road, and raised her 10-year-old daughter, Kelsey, the way her own mother had raised her, with routine and discipline and an enormous amount of love. Kelsey would later describe growing up as Beverly Cordell's daughter as feeling like someone had their arms around you all the time, even when she wasn't in the room. There were things about Beverly that made her unmistakably herself. She kept a grocery list magnetized to the refrigerator and updated it every single morning before Kelsey left for school. She drove a 1987 Ford Tempo in a green, so faded it had turned the color of old moss. She was saving tip money from the part-time waitressing shifts she picked up on weekends, every bill folded and placed in a mason jar on the kitchen shelf, because she had decided Kelsey was going to college, and that was not a possibility. It was a plan. She checked the jar every Sunday evening. She had been checking it for 4 years. The last time anyone in Beverly's family saw her whole was the evening of October 11th, 1990. A Friday. Her sister Loretta had come by for dinner. They had eaten pot roast. Kelsey had done her homework at the kitchen table. Beverly had walked Loretta to her car at 8:30, stood on the porch in the October air, and waved until the taillights disappeared around the bend. She told Loretta she'd call her Sunday. She never did. Saturday morning, October 12th, 1990. Beverly did not come downstairs. Kelsey waited, made herself cereal, waited some more. By 9 o'clock, she walked to the end of the driveway and stood there the way children do when they are frightened and do not yet have the words for it. Beverly's Ford Tempo was gone. The kitchen light was on. The coffee maker had run and gone cold. The grocery list on the refrigerator was blank, not updated, not replaced. Just blank. Beverly had not written in it that morning. By 10 o'clock, Kelsey had called her grandmother. By noon, Beverly's mother, Ruth Hager, was at the house. By 2 in the afternoon, she had called the Harlan County Sheriff's Department. At 3:17 p.m., Deputy Kenneth Asher arrived at Maple Fork Road. He took a report. He noted that there were no signs of a struggle inside the house. No broken windows. No overturned furniture. The bed had been slept in. Beverly's purse was on the kitchen counter, her wallet inside it, her driver's license, $14, and a folded receipt from the Save-A-Lot dated October 10th. Her coat was on the hook by the door. She had left without her purse. Without her coat. In October in Kentucky, at whatever hour she had left. She had walked out of her house without her coat. Deputy Asher filed the report. The official assessment, entered into the record that same day, was that Beverly Cordell had left voluntarily. That conclusion would stand, largely unchallenged, for the next 3 decades. What no one in the department noted, what would not surface again for 33 years, was a small detail in Asher's own original report. On the kitchen counter, beside Beverly's purse, there was a second coffee mug, rinsed, set in the drying rack. Beverly had company the night she disappeared. Whoever they were, they had cleaned up after themselves before they left. The investigation that followed was, by every account, inadequate. Detective Harlan Dees, a 20-year veteran of the county sheriff's department who was assigned the case in its first week, later described the 1990 inquiry as hampered from the start by the voluntary departure finding. Once authorities decided Beverly had walked away on her own, the investigative threshold shifted. Resources were limited. This was a rural county sheriff's department in 1990, without the digital tools, databases, or forensic capacity of larger jurisdictions. Missing persons cases that didn't fit a clear abduction template tended to slide. Dees pursued what leads he had. Beverly's ex-husband, Gary Cordell, was interviewed twice. He had an alibi for the night of the 11th. He had been at a poker game in Cumberland, confirmed by 4 other men. He was eliminated. A co-worker at Callaway Lumber, a man named Dennis Watts, who had asked Beverly to dinner twice and been turned down both times, was also interviewed. He worked the overnight shift at a gas station on Route 119 on October 11th. 3 customers confirmed seeing him there between 9 p.m. and 2 a.m. He, too, was eliminated. Meanwhile, Ruth Hager was doing everything she could. She printed flyers. She drove them to every gas station and diner within 40 miles. She called the sheriff's department every week, sometimes twice. She organized a community search of the woods along Clover Creek, 40 volunteers on a cold November Saturday. Nothing found. She wrote a letter to the Kentucky State Police requesting the case be elevated. The letter was acknowledged. Nothing changed. Kelsey turned 11 in December of 1990. She opened her gifts and did not cry until she was in bed that night. She had asked her grandmother whether her mother was coming back for Christmas. Ruth had said she didn't know. It was the most honest thing she could think to say. By the spring of 1991, the official investigation had produced no suspects, no evidence, and no new leads. The case went cold. Harlan County moved on in the way that small towns do, not forgetting exactly, but learning to live around the absence the way you learn to walk around furniture in a dark room. Detective Dees retired in 1998. Before he did, he copied the Cordell case file and took it home with him. Not officially, just in a box in his truck, the way some detectives carry cases they cannot put down. He kept it on a shelf in his garage. He looked at it every few years. He never found anything new. The reward poster that Beverly's family had put up in the window of Flo's Diner on Main Street stayed there for 12 years. The photograph faded. The paper curled at the corners. Nobody took it down. Every case on this channel represents weeks of research, verifying records, tracking down documents, reaching out to families who have carried these stories alone for decades. If you want us to keep uncovering the truth behind cases like Beverly's, take a moment to like this video and subscribe and drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. It means more than you know. Now, let's get back to Beverly Cordell. The children who had grown up watching their parents search Clover Creek were, by 2015, parents themselves. The sheriff's department had cycled through 3 sheriffs. The building that housed Callaway Lumber and Hardware had been torn down and replaced with a cell phone store. Kelsey Cordell had left Harlan County after college, moved to Lexington, built a life, and carried her mother with her every day in a way that anyone who has lost someone to an unresolved mystery would recognize immediately. A specific, unresolved grief. The kind that doesn't settle. The kind that keeps a folder of case documents in a drawer and checks the state cold case database twice a year. By 2022, Kelsey was 43 years old. She had been 10 when her mother disappeared. She had lived more of her life without her mother than with her. She had 2 children of her own, and every time she watched them sleep, she thought about a mason jar on a kitchen shelf and $14 in a wallet and a grocery list that never got written. It was Kelsey who had been quietly building something over the previous 3 years. She had connected with a nonprofit cold case organization based out of Lexington, a volunteer group of retired investigators, forensic genealogists, and legal advocates who worked pro bono on cases where families had been failed by the original system. She had submitted her mother's case in 2019. A retired Kentucky State Police investigator named Carol Fitch had taken it. And Carol Fitch, it turned out, was exactly the kind of person Beverly's case had been waiting 30 years for. Then, in February 2023, a man named Raymond Dale Pruitt died. He was 71 years old. He had lived his entire life in Harlan County. He had worked for most of his adult life as a site manager for a small excavation and grading company. He had never been married. He was survived by a sister in Ohio and a niece in Tennessee. He left behind a house full of things, and an estate sale company was hired to clear it out. On a cold Tuesday morning, Donna Marsh opened a shoebox. Inside it, in a Kodak envelope with an orange stripe, were 14 photographs. 13 of them were nothing. The 14th showed a woman seated at a kitchen table, smiling at the camera, a cup of coffee in her hands. She was wearing a pale blue sweater. Behind her, through a window, you could see the early green of a spring day. Donna Marsh did not recognize Beverly Cordell, but she did recognize the kitchen. She was standing in it. She called the sheriff's department that same afternoon. A deputy arrived and photographed the photograph. It was entered as evidence. Carol Fitch was contacted that evening. What followed happened quickly. The way things do after decades of silence. The photograph was dated, not by its content, but by the type of film stock, identified by a forensic photo analyst as consistent with processing done between 1988 and 1992. The kitchen in the background was definitively matched to the layout and fixtures of Raymond Dale Pruitt's home at 14 Ironwood Drive, Harlan County, the same home from which he had just been carried in a coffin. Records subpoenaed from the phone company for October 1990, records that had been preserved and transferred to digital archives in 2007, and that no one in the original investigation had ever requested, showed 3 calls made from Pruitt's landline to Beverly Cordell's home between September 14th and October 10th, 1990. The last one, on the 10th, lasted 11 minutes. Raymond Dale Pruitt had told the original investigators in 1990 that he barely knew Beverly Cordell. He had said they were acquaintances at most, that she had come into the hardware store a few times, that he'd seen her around town. He was interviewed once. He was never considered a serious suspect. His name appeared in the original case file as a peripheral figure. He had been her neighbor's brother. He had lived 4 miles from her house on Maple Fork Road. And he had, at some point in the late 1980s or early 1990s, had Beverly Cordell sitting at his kitchen table, smiling, with a cup of coffee in her hands. The coffee mug in the drying rack. The second one. The one that had been rinsed and set carefully aside before whoever left had gone. The case was formally elevated to a homicide investigation in March 2023. A forensic excavation team from the University of Kentucky was brought in to survey the property at 14 Ironwood Drive. Ground-penetrating radar was used, a technology that sends signals through soil to identify disturbances and anomalies that suggest buried materials, including human remains. On the 3rd day of the survey, the equipment identified an area of significant soil disturbance in the northwest corner of the rear lot, approximately 40 yards from the back of the house, beneath what had been a gravel-covered utility area for the better part of 3 decades. The excavation took 4 days. Beverly Ann Cordell was found on the second day. She had been there for 33 years. Raymond Dale Pruitt was beyond the reach of the law. He had taken that with him when he died. There would be no arrest, no trial, no courtroom where Kelsey Cordell could sit in the front row and watch a verdict be read. The justice that true crime audiences have come to expect. The moment the gavel falls, the moment someone is taken away in handcuffs, was not available here. It had been stolen by time, the way time steals so many things. But the case was closed. The Harlan County Sheriff's Department issued a formal finding on April 7, 2023, naming Raymond Dale Pruitt as the responsible party in the murder of Beverly Ann Cordell. The finding entered the public record. His name is attached to what he did, permanently, in the official files of the county he lived in his entire life. The community's reaction was quiet and complicated in the way that small-town revelations always are. People remembered Pruitt. Some had liked him well enough. Some called his sister in Ohio. Most simply sat with the knowledge that you can live in a place for decades, can share its roads and diners and churches, and still never fully know who is beside you. Kelsey Cordell drove back to Harlan County in April 2023 for the first time in 11 years. She stood at the site where her mother had been found. She did not speak to the cameras that were there. She spoke to her children afterward. She told them what her grandmother had always told her, that her mother had loved them before they existed, that love like that does not go anywhere, and that the truth, however long it takes, always finds its way home. The mason jar is still in Kelsey's kitchen. She moved it there when she first set up her own home in Lexington. The bills inside it are different now. Her own savings, her own version of a plan. Every Sunday evening, she checks it. Beverly Ann Cordell was 34 years old. She had a daughter who was going to college. She had a grocery list to write in the morning. She had 4 years of folded bills in a jar on a kitchen shelf and an October walk she never came back from. She deserved 30 more years, and 60 more, and a table at Kelsey's wedding, and names to learn for her grandchildren. All of that was taken from her by a man who stood 4 miles away and told investigators he barely knew her. What does it mean for justice when the law arrives after the last punishment it can offer? When a name on a file is all that remains to deliver? And what do we owe the families who kept the light on alone for decades because no institution would do it for them? Who filed the letters and printed the flyers and sat by the phone on Sunday evenings and refused, year after year, to let the world forget? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Did the photograph discovery surprise you? What detail from the original investigation troubles you most? And what does Beverly's case tell us about how cold case resources are allocated in rural communities that have fewer advocates and less attention than larger cities? Justice found Beverly Ann Cordell after 33 years. Stories like hers are why this channel exists and why the families who carry them deserve to be heard. If you believe truth is worth pursuing no matter how long it takes, subscribe so you don't miss the next case. There are more waiting in the description below. Thank you for being here.